The sound of sirens echoed through the shattered streets of Earth's capital, a city once teeming with life, now reduced to a smoking ruin. The sky above, once a bright blue, was now a swirl of red and black as debris from the crumbling space stations fell to the surface, igniting in fiery streaks. Buildings that had once housed the greatest minds in the galaxy were nothing more than hollow shells, their glass facades shattered and their foundations cracked. Earth, the proud center of human civilization, had fallen. Captain Lyra Asher stood on the balcony of the Imperial Command Center, her eyes scanning the devastation below. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her, the responsibility of being the last officer of the once glorious Terran Empire. Asher, once a symbol of hope, now stood as one of the last unbroken pieces of humanity's shattered legacy. Behind her, the shattered holo-communicator blinked intermittently, transmitting an emergency signal to scattered pockets of resistance. "Is anyone still out there?" she whispered to herself, though the question was futile. The enemy had wiped out most of the fleet. Earth's defenses were nothing more than smoldering wreckage. The last few ships that had remained were scattered across the galaxy, unable to return without the fleet's command center in operation. A voice crackled over the comlink, harsh and distorted. "Captain, we need to leave. Now." Lyra turned to see Lieutenant Nora Vasquez, a young officer who had only just joined the fleet weeks before the attack, standing at the doorway. Her face was grim, eyes wide with fear. "We can't just abandon the planet," Lyra snapped, the weight of the words sinking in. Abandon Earth. The thought of it felt like a betrayal, but there was no time for sentiment. The Alliance was closing in, its fleets gathering to finish the job. The Imperial fleet, their once unbeaten armada, had been decimated by surprise attacks. Coordinated, brutal, efficient. The very forces that had once bent the galaxy to their will were now powerless in the face of a relentless, unforeseen enemy. "We don't have a choice, Captain," Vasquez replied, her voice trembling. "The last bastion of resistance can't hold out much longer, and we've just received word. Earth's fallen." Asher's heart sank. The last planet, the heart of the human race, was lost. "Where do we go?" Lyra asked, her voice colder now. She had spent years leading human forces across the stars, bringing peace to the colonies, unifying the fractured pieces of humanity. But this was different. There was no immediate hope in sight. "We've located something, Captain," Vasquez said, stepping closer with a datapad in her hand. "Something powerful, hidden, on Earth. It might be our only shot at turning this around." Asher raised an eyebrow, her tactical mind already racing. A secret weapon, hidden beneath the wreckage of a fallen empire. It was a long shot, but it was the only chance they had. The message was clear. Without it, they were done for. "Where?" Lyra asked. Vasquez hesitated, her fingers trembling as she pulled up the map. "Beneath the old capital, in the ruins of the Imperial Archive." Lyra's gaze narrowed. The Imperial Archive had been Earth's most secure location, buried deep within the planet's core. Few even knew it existed, let alone the secrets it held. It had been the heart of the Empire's power, a place where ancient artifacts and advanced technology were safeguarded for future generations. "We go there," Lyra said, her voice firm. "Prepare the ship. We'll leave immediately." As they made their way to the escape vessel, Lyra knew one thing for certain. This was humanity's last chance. If they failed to recover whatever was hidden beneath the ruins, the Alliance would complete their conquest, and Earth would never rise again. The captain's heart beat in her chest with the realization. Earth's people had one hope left, and it lay in the ashes of their former glory. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The escape vessel plunged through Earth's atmosphere, its engines glowing bright against the darkened sky, as the crew raced toward the ruins of the Imperial Archive. Lyra Asher's heart pounded in her chest as she stared out the small viewport. The world she once knew, the bustling streets, the glittering skylines, was now nothing but a devastated wasteland. Yet buried within those ruins, there was a sliver of hope. An ancient weapon, hidden from the enemy, perhaps even from humanity itself. Coordinates locked. Captain. Lieutenant Vasquez called from the navigation station, her voice tight with barely suppressed anxiety. "We'll be there in 20 minutes." Lyra nodded without looking at her. The young officer had been with her since the start of the war. Her eyes were wide with fear now, but there was no turning back. The team was on the brink of discovering something that could change everything, or they would perish trying. As they neared the surface, the ship jolted, a sharp ping signaling an incoming transmission. It was from an encrypted channel, one of the last secure links to Earth's scattered forces. Lyra's hands hovered over the console, hesitating just for a moment before answering. "Captain Asher." A familiar voice crackled from the speaker. "Colonel Darius Ivy, the last commander of Earth's remaining ground forces. We've got problems. The Alliance has deployed a strike force near the old capital. We don't have much time before they sweep the area. If you're going in, you'll be on your own. We can't provide support." Lyra's mind raced. The Alliance had already begun sweeping the planet, ensuring that no stone went unturned. Their resources were vast, and if they found the archive before Lyra's team, humanity's last hope would be extinguished. "I'll get there first, Colonel," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "We're on our way. Prepare for extraction if we don't make it out." "Understood," Ivy replied, his tone colder than usual. "Good luck, Captain." The transmission ended, and Lyra turned to face her crew. Her heart tightened as she gazed at the mix of hardened soldiers and reluctant civilians, people who had lost everything and yet continued to fight. Everyone on this ship knew that this mission would likely be their last, but they were willing to risk it for Earth, for humanity's survival. As the ship descended, the landscape of the ruined capital emerged through the haze. The once proud Imperial Archive was nestled in the heart of the city, now reduced to a shattered fortress of stone and steel. The building itself had been built to withstand any attack, but nothing could withstand the onslaught of the Alliance. The remains of the Archive looked like a broken temple to a forgotten age. Lyra's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp warning from the ship's systems. "Incoming," the AI declared, its monotone voice echoing in the tense silence of the ship's cockpit. The unmistakable hum of an Alliance fighter squadron filled the air. And before anyone could react, the first blast of energy rocked the ship, sending it into a tailspin. Lyra's fingers flew across the controls, trying to stabilize the vessel as it plunged toward the ground. "Hold on," she shouted, gritting her teeth. The vessel shook violently, the lights flickering as a barrage of fire came from above. Lyra's heart raced as the sound of the impact echoed throughout the ship. They had barely managed to escape from the Alliance's iron grip before, but now they were in the fight for their lives. "Brace for impact," Lyra barked, and then, with one final jolt, the ship crashed into the ruins of the Archive's outer walls. Dust and debris filled the air, and everything went dark. Lyra groaned as the world around her spun, her vision swimming with a blur of smoke and sparks. The ship's emergency lights blinked on, casting an eerie glow over the wreckage. She shook her head, forcing herself to focus. The harsh silence that followed the crash was broken by the urgent hiss of the ship's airlocks releasing. The team had to move fast. Time was running out. Everyone out. Lyra barked, her voice sharp and commanding as she crawled over the wreckage, ignoring the pain that shot through her body. She stumbled to her feet, taking a moment to steady herself before rushing to the rear hatch. The others were already pulling themselves from the wreckage, their faces grim but determined. Vasquez was the first to emerge, her breath quick and shallow from the impact, but her eyes were wide with resolve. "Captain, we've got incoming. I can hear their engines." She gestured to the distant sky, where dark shapes were beginning to take form. Lyra's gaze followed her lead, spotting the silhouettes of Alliance dropships descending from the smoke-filled sky. There was no time to waste. The ship, now half buried in rubble, was no longer an option for escape. They would have to fight their way through the heart of the ruined archive, which had once held humanity's greatest secrets, and, according to their intel, its last weapon. "Move," Lyra ordered, signaling the team to advance. They had no choice but to head deeper into the archive's remains. It was the only way to stay one step ahead of the enemy. The rest of the team fell in line behind her, weapons drawn, moving with practiced precision, despite the chaos around them. The ruined capital was a labyrinth of wrecked buildings, broken glass, and twisted metal. It was eerily quiet now, save for the distant whine of approaching Alliance forces. They couldn't afford to stay out in the open. Lyra led them through a narrow, half-collapsed alley, the walls of ancient structures barely standing against the weight of centuries of war. "The archive's entrance is just ahead," Vask said, her voice tight with both fear and hope. "If it's still intact." "It better be," Lyra muttered under her breath, her pulse quickening. The archive was humanity's last hope, and if it had been compromised or destroyed, their mission and Earth's future would be over. The team rounded a corner, and before them stood the crumbling facade of the Imperial Archive. The structure, though battered, still held a menacing grandeur, its once imposing columns cracked but unyielding. The entrance lay ahead, hidden beneath a pile of debris. Lyra motioned for Vasquez and the others to clear the path, her gaze scanning the area for threats. Vasquez kicked aside a jagged piece of stone, revealing a set of heavy blast doors, still sealed. Lyra stepped forward, pressing a hand against the cold metal. She could feel the weight of history in that moment, the responsibility of what lay behind those doors. "We'll need explosives to get through," Vask said, her voice full of grim certainty. "Unless we want to spend hours trying to hack into their security systems." "No time for that," Lyra replied, her voice hardening with resolve. "Get the charges ready." Within moments, Vasquez and the others set to work, placing the charges around the blast doors. Lyra kept watch, her senses heightened as the sound of Alliance footsteps grew louder. It wouldn't be long before they found them. "Ready," Vask said, stepping back and giving Lyra a quick nod. "On your mark." Lyra took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself for what lay beyond. "Do it." The explosion was deafening, the force of it throwing them all backward. Lyra hit the ground with a harsh thud, but quickly scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. The dust and smoke cleared, revealing the now gaping hole in the archive's entrance. Without a moment's hesitation, Lyra sprinted toward the opening. Her team followed close behind, weapons raised and ready for whatever dangers awaited inside. They crossed the threshold into the archive, and the vast, shadowed expanse swallowed them whole. The air was thick with the scent of aged books and forgotten technology, and the silence felt almost oppressive. This place had been the heart of Earth's military power, a place where secrets of unimaginable value had been stored. And now, Lyra was about to uncover those secrets, or die trying. The air inside the Imperial Archive was cool and dry, carrying the weight of centuries in every breath. The long-forgotten halls stretched ahead, lined with towering shelves that had once held records of every major military operation, every weapon designed, every secret the Empire had ever sought to keep. The floors were littered with debris, broken glass, discarded papers, and rusted remnants of technology that had not seen the light of day in generations. Yet beneath the dust, there was an undeniable sense of power in the silence, as if the archive itself still remembered the glory of its past. Lyra moved cautiously through the dimly lit corridors, her eyes scanning the shadows, waiting for a sign of movement of life, or, more likely, of the enemy. Her team moved in tight formation behind her, weapons raised and alert. The faint sound of their footsteps echoed in the otherwise still space, amplifying the tension that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. "Stay sharp," Lyra murmured to her team, her voice barely above a whisper. The last thing they needed was to be ambushed here, in the heart of their enemy's domain. The Alliance had been relentless, and with each passing second, The risk of their discovery grew. She glanced back at Vasquez, who was monitoring the scanners for any signs of an incoming threat. The young lieutenant's face was pale, but her eyes were fixed with unwavering determination. "Nothing yet, Captain. But we're not going to have long. Those dropships are getting closer." Lyra's jaw tightened. They had minutes, maybe less, before the Alliance forces swept the area. The Archive had been humanity's crown jewel, its knowledge and its most dangerous secrets hidden deep within. But what lay within its vaults now was humanity's last hope, and Lyra was not about to let it slip through her fingers. They continued down the corridor, passing rows of ancient consoles and security systems long outdated. It was clear the place had been abandoned in haste. The empire that had once called this place its center of power had crumbled, leaving behind only the echoes of its once great strength. Lyra could feel the weight of that loss, the crushing reminder of everything humanity had fought for, and everything it stood to lose. Finally, they reached a set of reinforced doors, engraved with the insignia of the Imperial High Command. This was it, the vault that held Earth's greatest secrets, the last remaining legacy of the Empire's military might. Lyra's pulse quickened as she approached the console beside the door, her fingers already moving to access the controls. "Stand by," she ordered. "Vasquez, get ready to breach." The console sparked to life as Lyra input a series of codes she had memorized from her days as a fleet officer. The door groaned, its ancient mechanisms grinding as it slowly opened, revealing a chamber bathed in an eerie greenish glow. The vault beyond was vast, its walls lined with rows upon rows of mysterious devices, weapons, and databanks that hummed with dormant power. But it was the object in the center of the room that caught Lyra's attention, a pedestal upon which rested a spherical device, glowing faintly with an unnatural light. It was unlike anything she had seen before. Not a weapon, at least not in the traditional sense. Its design was alien, otherworldly, as though it didn't belong to humanity at all. "What is that?" Vasquez whispered, awe and fear mixing in her voice. Lyra stepped forward, her hand hovering over the device. A chill ran down her spine as she realized that this was no ordinary relic. This was the weapon, the one the Empire had hidden away, the one they had been protecting for centuries. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice steady, though she could feel the enormity of the moment. "This is humanity's last hope." Before she could reach for the device, the faint hum of engines reached their ears, a low, ominous sound that grew louder with each passing second. The Alliance was here. "Captain, we've got company," shouted one of the soldiers, his voice laced with panic. Lyra snapped her gaze toward the entrance. Dark shapes were silhouetted against the dim light outside the vault. Alliance soldiers. They had made it. The hunt had ended. "We hold them off," Lyra said, voice unwavering. "Take the device, now. Move fast." Vasquez and the others sprang into action, gathering the device as Lyra took her position by the door. The sound of approaching footsteps intensified, and Lyra's heart raced. There was no turning back now. Earth's last weapon, the key to humanity's survival, was within their grasp. But the cost of retrieving it would be steep, and they might not make it out alive. She steadied her weapon and prepared to face the Alliance. The first shot rang out as the door to the vault crashed open. Lyra's heart skipped a beat as a volley of energy fire lit up the corridor, the blasts sizzling through the air. She dove behind a nearby console, narrowly avoiding the deadly barrage. The rest of the team scattered, taking cover as the Alliance soldiers stormed into the chamber, their armor gleaming in the dim light. "Get that weapon out of here," Lyra shouted to Vasquez, who was crouched by the pedestal, carefully securing the spherical device in a protective case. The young lieutenant nodded grimly, her face a mask of concentration as she worked quickly. Lyra's mind raced, calculating their next move. They were outnumbered, and the Alliance troops were well-trained and heavily armed. But this wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the future of humanity. If they failed, Earth would fall. The archive would be lost forever, and with it, any hope of reclaiming the galaxy from the Alliance's grasp. The soldiers moved with military precision, their weapons raised, eyes scanning the room for targets. Lyra peeked from behind cover, firing a series of shots that forced the enemy to take cover. The energy blasts ricocheted off the walls, illuminating the vast chamber in flashes of light. She could hear the sounds of her team returning fire, but their position was precarious. They couldn't hold off the enemy forever. Vasquez moved quickly, the case containing the device clutched tightly in her hands. "Captain, I've got it. But we need to get out of here now." Lyra's eyes darted around the room. The Alliance was advancing, pushing them back toward the far side of the vault. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. "Fall back," she ordered. "Head for the secondary exit. We're not fighting our way out of here, not with this many on our tail." The team didn't hesitate. They broke cover and moved swiftly toward the hidden exit at the far end of the vault, their weapons firing in a steady rhythm as they provided covering fire for each other. Lyra's mind was sharp, every decision calculated with ruthless efficiency. Her crew had been through hell together, and they were not about to give up now. But the enemy was relentless. The Alliance soldiers surged forward. Their leader, a tall figure clad in sleek black armor, shouted orders as they advanced, weapons raised. Lyra's eyes narrowed as she recognized him. He was no ordinary soldier. His movements were precise, methodical. He was an officer, likely a commander in the Alliance's elite ranks. They had sent their best to secure the archive, and now they were going to make sure no one escaped with its secrets. "We've got to buy more time," Lyra muttered under her breath. She made a split-second decision and turned to face the incoming enemy. "Cover me," she shouted to her team. Without waiting for a response, she charged toward a nearby set of reinforced doors, hoping to slow the enemy's advance. She reached the control panel and punched in the override codes, activating the lockdown sequence. The massive doors slammed shut with a heavy clang, blocking the main entrance to the vault. The sound of pounding footsteps echoed from the other side, but for now, they had a moment's respite. That should hold them off for a little while, Lyra said, breathing heavily as she turned back to her team. "Vasquez, we've got to move. The secondary exit's this way." They didn't waste any time. Lyra led the team through a narrow passage that wound deeper into the archive's bowels. The walls here were coated in dust, the air thick with the stench of decay. The deeper they went, the more ancient and forgotten the facility became. Lyra could only wonder how many others had once passed through these halls, seeking the same power that now lay within their hands. The secondary exit was only a few hundred meters ahead, but they weren't out of the woods yet. Lyra's thoughts raced as she considered their options. The mission had succeeded in retrieving the weapon, but now they had to escape. The Alliance would stop at nothing to prevent them from leaving with it, and Lyra knew there was only one chance to make it out alive. "Ready your weapons," she ordered quietly, her voice calm but filled with the urgency of their situation. "We make it to the exit, and then we fight our way out of here. No one gets left behind." As they reached the exit, Lyra's hand hovered over the door's release mechanism. She knew what they were about to face, what they would have to endure to survive. There was no turning back now. The fate of Earth, and of humanity, was on the line. With one final breath, Lyra pressed the button, and the door slid open, revealing the storm of battle waiting for them outside. The moment the door opened, chaos erupted. The brilliant light of the outside world flooded the passage, blinding them for a fraction of a second. Lyra didn't hesitate. Her fingers wrapped around her weapon as she led the charge, stepping out into the open air. The wind was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and burning debris. The sky was dark, as if the storm clouds themselves had conspired with the enemy to trap them. Ahead, the Alliance forces had already set up a perimeter, their sleek black armor reflecting the eerie light from the burning remains of the capital. Lyra's eyes locked onto the nearest soldier, and she squeezed the trigger. The energy bolt flew through the air with a sharp crack, striking the soldier square in the chest. He fell without a sound. "Move, move, move," Lyra shouted, the urgency in her voice carrying over the noise of the firefight that had just begun. Her team followed her lead, taking cover behind a pile of rubble as the Alliance soldiers retaliated, their weapons lighting up the night like deadly stars. Vasquez, still clutching the case containing the weapon, was behind Lyra, her face a grim mask. "We can't keep this up forever, Captain," she said between breaths, her voice tight. "There are too many." Lyra's mind raced. They needed an opening, something to allow them to escape with the weapon. She scanned the battlefield, noting the positions of their enemies, the layout of the capital, and the best routes to the transport ships they had hidden. "There," Lyra pointed, spotting a narrow alleyway to the left, flanked by 2 towering ruins. "We cut through there. It'll lead us straight to the extraction point." The team acknowledged her plan, and with a single nod, Lyra signaled the advance. The moment they moved, the Alliance opened fire again, their shots whizzing past with deadly precision. Lyra ducked, her heart pounding, but she didn't break stride. They had no time to waste. As they sprinted toward the alleyway, Lyra heard the whirring sound of jetpacks behind them. She glanced over her shoulder just in time to see a pair of Alliance soldiers flying in from above, their weapons raised, aiming to intercept them before they reached the safety of the alley. "Skyward," Lyra shouted, raising her own weapon to target the soldiers. Her team reacted instantly. One of the soldiers, Sergeant Holt, fired a quick burst, and one of the flying enemies plummeted to the ground, crashing in a heap. The second soldier had no chance to adjust before a second shot from Lyra's weapon sent him spiraling out of control, falling into the burning wreckage below. "Keep moving," Lyra ordered, her voice a controlled roar as she pulled ahead. The others followed close behind, charging down the alleyway, their footsteps quick and heavy. The walls around them were crumbling, and in the distance, the faint sound of incoming reinforcements could already be heard. The alley seemed endless, the air thick with the noise of gunfire and distant explosions. They were on a razor's edge, their survival balanced on a knife. Lyra's mind was sharp, constantly calculating their next move. They couldn't afford to let up. They reached the end of the alley, just as the first wave of reinforcements arrived. Lyra's eyes widened as she spotted their extraction ship in the distance, a small but heavily armed transport that had been waiting for them on standby. The ship was their only chance of survival, but it was still too far to reach. The Alliance had them trapped in a narrowing space, and unless they could break free, they wouldn't make it out. Lyra's heart thundered in her chest, but her focus remained steady. She was the captain, and this was her fight. She turned back to her team. "We fight our way out," she commanded, the fire in her voice setting the tone. "Form up and don't stop until you're on that ship." Without a word, the team fell into position. Holt and Vasquez moved to the front, covering the rest of the team as they advanced. Lyra took up the rear, making sure none of her soldiers were left behind. The Alliance was closing in, but they wouldn't let it happen. A series of rapid shots rang out, and for a split second, Lyra saw one of her soldiers drop to the ground, wounded, but she couldn't stop. She couldn't hesitate. "Cover fire," Lyra yelled, aiming her weapon at an incoming group of soldiers, her hands steady as she fired round after round. Her shots were precise, tearing through their ranks. The enemy soldiers scattered, trying to find new cover. The team moved forward with grim determination, but the pressure was mounting. Lyra knew they were running out of time. The Alliance would soon regroup and try to cut them off. They needed to make it to the transport, and they needed to do it now. "Get to the ship," Lyra shouted again, rallying her team. They pushed on, every step a battle. The sound of gunfire rang in their ears, the night sky alive with the threat of death. But through the smoke and the chaos, there was only one thought on Lyra's mind. They had come too far to fail now. The distance to the transport seemed to stretch longer with every step they took. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning fuel. Lyra's breath came in shallow gasps as she led her team through the hellscape, the echoes of gunfire surrounding them, the pounding of their hearts almost drowned out by the roar of explosions. "Hold the line," she commanded as another volley of fire whizzed past, narrowly missing them. The team pressed forward, their faces set in grim determination. Holt and Vasquez were at the front, their weapons held steady as they provided covering fire for the others. Lyra stayed in the rear, ensuring no one was left behind. The transport ship was now in sight, but it was still too far. The Alliance was closing in on them, and Lyra knew they didn't have much time before they were swarmed. Their enemies were relentless, and their numbers were overwhelming. But they couldn't stop. Not now. Not when they had the weapon that could turn the tide of the war. "Almost there," Vasquez muttered, her voice barely audible over the chaos. "Keep moving." Lyra shouted back, her eyes fixed on the ship in the distance. The transport was their only hope. Without it, they would be sitting ducks, easy targets for the Alliance's final push. They reached the outer perimeter of the landing zone, where the transport's weapon systems had already begun to fire on incoming enemy forces, providing them with a much-needed buffer. The ship was heavily armed, but it couldn't hold off the entire Alliance by itself. Lyra knew that they needed to get to the ship before it became a target. "On me," she yelled, waving her team forward. "We're making a dash for it. Stick close and don't fall behind." With a single motion, they moved, sprinting across the open ground toward the ship. Lyra's heart raced, her legs pumping as fast as they could carry her. She could hear the growl of the ship's engines, feel the vibrations in the air as it prepared for takeoff. But the Alliance was already adjusting its strategy, sending more soldiers into the landing zone, surrounding them from all sides. "Captain, incoming," Holt shouted, his eyes wide as he spotted a group of enemy soldiers converging from the left. Lyra didn't hesitate. She fired several shots in rapid succession, cutting down the first two soldiers before they could even raise their weapons. But there were more, so many more. The Alliance wasn't going to let them escape easily. They couldn't afford to waste time. "We're almost there," Lyra yelled, her voice steely with resolve. She could see the ramp of the transport lowering, the crew members inside waving them forward. But there was still a distance to cover, and the enemy was closing in quickly. "Go," Lyra ordered, her team charging forward with a renewed sense of urgency. They reached the base of the ramp, but the sound of jetpacks filled the air again. Lyra looked up to see two Alliance soldiers descending from above, their weapons locked on her team. They were closing in fast. Without thinking, Lyra dove to the side, rolling to a crouch, and fired. The first soldier was hit, spiraling out of control and crashing into the dirt. The second soldier wasn't as easily deterred, his aim true. Lyra's heart skipped a beat as she saw him line up a shot, targeting Vasquez, who had just reached the ramp. "No," Lyra shouted, instinct taking over. She fired on instinct, the blast taking down the soldier midair, his body crumpling before he could pull the trigger. "Vasquez, get in," Lyra yelled, her pulse pounding in her ears. The young lieutenant didn't need to be told twice. She sprinted the final few feet, leaping up the ramp and into the safety of the ship, the case containing the weapon still clutched tightly in her hands. Lyra followed, just as Holt and the rest of the team piled in behind her. The ramp began to rise, and the ship's engines roared to life. "Get us out of here," Lyra barked into the comms, the adrenaline still surging through her veins. The ship jerked upward, lifting off the ground as the last few rounds of enemy fire bounced harmlessly off its shields. Lyra watched through the viewports as the landscape below receded into the distance, the city they had fought so hard to reclaim now a smoldering ruin beneath them. The Alliance forces would regroup, but they had bought themselves precious time. The ship ascended into the sky, the stars beyond beckoning, and Lyra allowed herself a single deep breath. But her relief was fleeting. The war wasn't over. Not yet. "Captain," Vasquez's voice crackled over the comms, her tone tight with anticipation. "The weapon. We've got it. But what now?" Lyra stared out the viewport, her eyes dark with resolve. The weapon they had retrieved was more than just a tool. It was humanity's last chance, their final hope, the key to turning the tide of the war. "We regroup," Lyra said, her voice cold and resolute. "And then we strike back. The Alliance may have taken the throne, but they won't keep it." She turned her gaze to the rest of her team, their faces weary but determined. "We'll rebuild. Together, Earth will rise again." As the ship sped away from the war-torn planet, the weight of the mission settled on Lyra's shoulders. The true battle was just beginning. As the ship streaked through the void, leaving behind the burning remnants of their home world, Lyra stood at the viewport, her thoughts heavy with the weight of the mission. Earth had been shattered. The Alliance had taken the throne, but they hadn't claimed victory. Not yet. The weapon in their possession was more than just an artifact. It was humanity's key to retaking what was theirs. "We're clear of the system, Captain," Holt said from behind her, his voice steady, but tinged with the exhaustion of the battle. "But we won't be safe for long. The Alliance won't let us get away this easy." Lyra nodded, her gaze still locked on the stars. She knew the reality all too well. The Alliance was relentless. They would chase them across the galaxy if it meant securing their hold on the throne. But Lyra wasn't about to let that happen. "We need to find a secure location," she said, turning to face her team. "Somewhere we can regroup, plan our next move. Earth may be lost, but we're not. We still have the will to fight." Vasquez stepped forward, the case containing the weapon still clutched in her arms. Her face was pale from the exhaustion of the battle, but her eyes were clear, focused. "Captain, what exactly is this weapon we've retrieved? What makes it so important?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, the answer lingering in the back of her mind. She knew the significance of the weapon, but it was something that only the highest-ranking members of Earth's military command knew in full. The rest of the team had only received vague details. This weapon could shift the balance of the war, but they didn't know how or why. "It's an ancient technology," Lyra explained, her voice low. "One that was left behind by an extinct civilization long before the Alliance ever set foot in this galaxy. Earth scientists discovered its existence years ago, but the details have been kept secret, hidden away. We thought it was just a myth. Until now." She turned to look out at the stars again, her mind racing. "This weapon, it's capable of more than just destruction. It can disrupt entire fleets, disable entire systems. And if we use it right, we can make the Alliance pay for what they've done." The room fell silent, the gravity of her words sinking in. The weapon was humanity's final chance, their last tool to push back against the overwhelming force of the Alliance, and they were about to learn how to use it. How do we even begin to unlock its power? Holt asked, his voice uncertain. Lyra clenched her fists. "We have a few old allies left, and they're not all from Earth. The weapon needs to be activated by a specific frequency, something only certain ancient codices can decipher. We know where those codices are, hidden deep within the core of the galaxy." Vasquez's eyes widened. "So, we're going back to the heart of the enemy's territory." Lyra met her gaze, the fire in her eyes unmistakable. "We're going to take back what's ours. We'll strike at the core of the Alliance, where they think they're untouchable. We'll make them fear humanity again." The ship's comm system buzzed to life, cutting through the tension in the room. "Captain, we've received a transmission," the communications officer said, his voice tight. It's from Earth. They want to speak with you." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She knew that the homeworld was under the Alliance's control, but Earth's people hadn't given up yet. The rebellion was still alive. "Patch it through," Lyra said, her voice calm but resolute. The screen flickered for a moment before a familiar face appeared. General Thorne, the leader of the remaining resistance on Earth. His face was drawn, weary from the war, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Lyra," he said, his voice rough but strong. "I knew you'd make it out. We've been waiting for you." Lyra's heart surged. "General Thorne, it's good to hear your voice. We've got the weapon. We're on our way to the galaxy's core to get the codices we need to activate it. We can't do this without you." Thorne's lips curled into a faint smile. "We've been working on that, Captain. We've got our own network, hidden in the shadows. The Alliance doesn't know it exists. We'll help you get what you need. But know this, we've lost a lot of people. This is our last shot." Lyra nodded, her resolve solidifying. "Then we won't waste it. We'll give you the intel you need," Thorne said, his gaze unwavering. "And when you're ready, we'll strike together." Lyra's grip tightened on the edge of the console. The rebellion was far from over. Earth was down, but it wasn't out. With the weapon in their hands, with the support of the remaining resistance, they could still win. She turned to her team, the spark of rebellion lighting in their eyes. "Prepare for the next phase of the mission. We're going to bring the fight to the Alliance. We'll reclaim the throne, and we'll make them regret ever thinking they could break us." As the ship altered course toward the heart of enemy space, Lyra felt the weight of their mission settle in her chest. They were far from the end, but with every decision, every battle, they were one step closer to reclaiming what had been lost. The Alliance might have thought they had won, but they had never faced humanity's will to survive.